Howdy everybody, it's Bruce with Board Game Impact. In this video, I'm going to be talking about understanding the dynamics of your gaming group and how you can get to play more games with more people and have even better relationships if you choose to do so. Where all this is coming from. Board Game Impact is a bi-weekly podcast. You can find it on all the platforms, but I also make this kind of content on here, which is all designed to inform, educate, and enhance our hobby by being intentional and learning some things along the way, which is pretty cool. So how we do that, though, is the podcast is hosted by myself and my buddy Josh. We both work full-time in higher education. I am getting my PhD in human resource development. I am almost there, my last stretch of classes, but I also teach leadership theory and I teach some other classes at the university as well. And so if you're interested in hearing how we apply our educational frameworks and lenses and paradigms to the content we're consuming, as well as seeking to inform yourself as a gamer, I recommend you click the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you can be notified whenever we're putting out these different sets of content. But again, in today's video, what I'm covering is how do we understand our gaming group and how can we make it even better by applying what's called social network analysis and leader member exchange theory. So again, if that sounds like something of interest to you, make sure to hit subscribe because I love making this content. It's been so much fun combining my PhD work, my teaching, and my passion for the board game hobby. Okay, so where all this stuff comes in. So again, we're going to be talking social network analysis and leader member exchange theory. I'm going to start with leader member exchange theory to build into everything. But at the end of the video, I'm going to be talking about what you can do to get more out of your relationships, have better relationships, play more games, and just have a probably better experience in the hobby. So I recommend you stay tuned. Okay, so what is all this stuff? So I've been in this reflective mode a little bit. Just had virtual gaming convention just the other weekend, put on by BGG, had a lot of fun. I typically go to gaming conventions throughout the year, but obviously at the time of this recording, on time of it being published, we're in the midst of the pandemic, right? And so with that, I haven't been able to game in person, but I've been able to play online. And I had this moment of reflecting on my previous experiences. So I was thinking back a year ago, and this was Board Game Geek. Before all the tablecloths are put on, this is the main hall of the location in Dallas, which typically has 5,000 people at the convention. It's a fantastic time if you ever get the opportunity. And then this was it, full. And so this got me thinking of who have I been able to play games with? Who haven't I seen since I haven't been able to play in person? And I wanted to understand those dynamics. And so I went down a pretty cool rabbit hole and created this. This is actually the social network of my gaming group. And I'm going to explain how this all works. We're going to build back to this. You're going to see this again. I'm going to explain all these dynamics going on in this pretty cool and weird spider web of relationships. Okay, so what do we need to know to get to that? First of all, we're going to start with what's called leader member exchange theory. This was published by Danseru and some other scholars back in the 1970s. And I'm pulling for the leadership theory stuff from this book, which is Leadership by Nordhaus. This is the 8th edition. Like, this is the book if you want to know stuff about leadership. Phenomenal. If you want to talk about other leadership things, like shoot me messages in the comments, because I'd love to talk with you about those things. But leader member exchange theory came on the heels of what's called situational leadership theory from the 1960s, which was the first leadership theory to acknowledge that a leader can change their behaviors to match the environment and also the experience and motivations of their followers. Makes sense, but that was fundamentally different. In leader member exchange theory, it acknowledges that there's these things called vertical dyads between a leader and a follower. And for us, we're just going to consider that as ourselves and our friends and our gaming acquaintances. We'll get to those terms in a second, but essentially a relationship with people. And that those relationships can be different. So inherently there is some sort of power structure. That's why it says vertical dyad. But the core of it really goes down to those relationships are different between people and just between groups. And so you end up having what's called in-groups and out-groups. Now, you might have heard those terms before. This is where that came from. So this is pretty cool stuff. And so I'm going to show you what an in-group gets access to from a gaming lens. And flip the script on it, and that's what an out group gets. Spoiler alert, they don't get much and often disenfranchised. So an in group gets more information. So if I have a strong in group relationship with certain people in the gaming hobby, they're going to tell me more about the games they're getting. They're going to tell me about the games in their collection, what their schedule is. I'm going to get more information, and I'm also going to share more information with them. They might tell me about a gaming convention that I've never heard of. That might be a great experience to go and try out. So more information, that's amazing. Secondly, more influence. So this is reciprocal. So you and they will have more influence over each other. It's not a bad thing. It just means, hey, do you want to set up a game night on Tuesday? Yeah, sure. I'm free on Tuesday. Let's play a game. You weren't even considering playing games on Tuesday unless they brought it up. So they can have influence over your behaviors, your actions, and the same thing for you to them in a really cool way. I could go on the Spider-Man quote, but I'm not going to. So just remember all this in moderation, please. You have more confidence. These are people that you know better. You have stronger and tighter relationships with. And so subconsciously, you're not having to be as cognizant of trying to be a person for them. Now, I don't encourage you to try and be someone you're not to begin with. I actually want you to have more authentic relationships with more people. But our subconscious, as we get more comfortable around people, it allows us to kind of just be. And we tend to peel back the onion a couple layers and have a better just gaming experience when we're playing with people who we have a relationship with. That's just a fact. And so that's a cool thing. But there's also a greater concern for one another. So with this, I know that I have some friends that like cooperative style games where it's you versus the game, like just does not go well for them. Like it's not their thing. And so I have a concern when I'm packing my game bag. If I know I'm going to go game with certain individuals, then I might not put those kind of games in it if that player is going to be there and I know it's going to cause a negative experience. Now, they're going to do the same thing for you, though, in a strong relationship. So that means you're going to actually have better quality experiences both ways in this strong dyad. And lastly, they tend to do extra things for you or for each other. Maybe that is carving out extra time, which is a precious commodity. But also I think of one of my good friends who I'm going to call out in the web here in a second, who went down to Houston, which is about 2 hours away, and went to a gaming store and was like, hey, I'm here. I know you haven't been able to get out of the house. Is there anything you need or looking for? I was like, yeah, actually, I could really use this one paint. I haven't been able to get online for painting my miniatures. And he found it, and he just said, Merry Thanksgiving, Miss, New Year's. And I was like, oh, that's very, like, super kind of you, and thank you for doing that. But that is because of the relationship that exists there, and I'm very thankful for that. But it also translates into non-gaming things, too, of more invites, more access to do extra things because we have a genuine relationship with each other, and that's a great thing. Okay, so that intentionality of all of those things, remember, outgroups the opposite of all that. I'd rather come at all this from a lens of positivity, but the intentionality of thinking about who you play games with and who they are and being intentional about those relationships enables you to avoid bias of you might only have certain gaming experiences because that was the confines of your existing gaming group dynamic, where if you're intentional about making that more inclusive and stronger relationships with more people, you're able to avoid any short-term biases that you might have because it gives you more experiences. And you'll also have more experiences through this intentionality of building positive relationships. You might be able to game more frequently. You might be able to play different games with different people and be presented with more gaming opportunities than you've had in the past. Essentially, it all boils down to relationships, and relationships are a really good thing. They don't come from nowhere, though. I actually love the analogy and the metaphors shown by the movie Hitch, who actually the real Hitch went to the same graduate program that I did in Ohio. And so that's just kind of cool, like fun little fact. And he talks about the first kiss. And if you haven't seen the movie or read the books and things like that, essentially that in a relationship for a first kiss, one person has to go 90, the other person comes 10. And then over time, that relationship changes and it becomes more dynamic and more reciprocal. And so leader-member exchange theory talked about this back in the 1970s, but we just forget about it. But leader-member exchange theory says there's 3 levels of relationships and that those things come over time. So those 3 levels are we move from stranger to acquaintance to partner. Now, here's the reality though. Some people might top out at stranger for you. Some people might top out as acquaintance. Some people might top out as partner, and then become distant. Just want to acknowledge there can be a falling off point with these different things. And as we move across this, time is there, but also we just need to acknowledge too, vulnerability and self-awareness in the situation has to be present. You have to be more and more of your true self and more genuine in the relationship. But essentially, you move from this like scripted interaction of being a stranger of typical 20 questions. What games do you like? What do you want to play? Very scripted interactions. It's just kind of how you've been trained over life to make small talk. Then you get to more acquaintance, which is tested, which is, oh, I'm going to put this game out. Let's see how this goes. Oh, that didn't go well. Now I have some new information about this dynamic. So that individual I talked to you about who doesn't like co-ops, well, I wouldn't have known that unless we intentionally tested that relationship and came to an understanding. And then finally you get to partner, which is more of a negotiated relationship. I would say that one of all of these is the strongest nature of a true relationship. How you can view that though is through the following 2, and that is the influence and the exchanges. So in the beginning, it's very one way, low quality. It's very giving, or you're having to pour out everything, that 90%. That is very hard to sustain, and it's exhausting. It can be exhausting if it's what you're doing all the time. You can't just be giving everything. You also have to fill your bucket. And so if you're able to move across this relationship spectrum, you're able to then also get your bucket filled instead of always pouring and pouring and pouring, have a more true and holistic relationship. But it moves from one way to kind of mixed to reciprocal, and fulfilling, kind of like a yin and yang, where it kind of goes back and forth all the time. And obviously, as you also move across that, you're going to get higher quality relationships. And if you notice the interests switch from self to myself and you, it's an and versus an us, which is the last one. So what are we wanting to do? Not what are you wanting to do and what am I wanting to do? Rather, what are we wanting to do? Okay, so where does this all fit in? I know this is a crash course, and I just think this is really cool to analyze our gaming experience. And remember, I'm going to give you some tips here in a second on what can you do to improve your relationships and get more games to the table and get more experiences. Okay, so that weird map thing I showed you before, that's called a social network. I know there's the movie, and obviously there's social media platforms. Those things, yeah, they talk about this a little bit, but a lot of times when people ask about relationships, it's very anecdotal and very narrative-based, qualitative data about what is your view on your relationship with insert person. Scale of 1 to 5, like strongly disagree, strongly agree about factors of that relationship. Well, that might give you some anecdotal evidence. However, it doesn't really map it, and it's kind of more abstracted of what do you do with it. So a social network is a way to visualize your relationship with others. Now, you might not be in a place to do this, but it's cool to try and map it. So I'm going to encourage you to try. So how this works is there's 2 things. There's nodes and edges. Nodes, these are the dots, and edges are the lines. So the nodes for this kind of social network are people. So every dot is a person. So in this dot and this dot have a relationship. That's why there's an edge between them. Actually, this person and this person, these 3 people, all have a relationship kind of together as a kind of a packed unit. However, this one down here only has a relationship with this person. This person only has a relationship with this person. Opposite, sorry. But so if we were to remove this one dot, this other dot is most likely completely excluded, not even on the radar. And so it says essentially that here is a packed unit, and this person is on the fringe, that this person over here does not really have a relationship. And so what did I do? How did I, this is mine, at least for 100 game interactions. So what I did is I downloaded my Board Game Geek stats because I logged my plays on my BG Apps app. BG Stats app, my apologies, which uploaded to boardgamegeek.com. And I downloaded that data. And for me, I made sure to log what game it was and who I played it with. And that's important because when I downloaded the data, I had 100 different game experiences. And this was from a window that I was just testing this out with. So this is over the 2019 period. And I was left with 36 people, including one of those people being AI, because I did track when I played against a bot versus just playing it solo. It's whenever they had that like extra person, the ghost player, which that's a whole nother conversation video. And from there, though, it's not only important to figure out, okay, where am I? What's my relationship with the people? But I also wanted to know who has a relationship with whom? Who else is at the table? And if I wanted to, I could add in layers like what type of game, because I can map that because I took that data. I could map the games out. However, for simplicity, I just wanted to look at the relationships. So I'm actually going to switch this screen over to the mapping software, which is free. It's called Gephi, Gephi. But the key is knowing how to import the data. And so what this looks like, I am the big green dot in the center. Because all these connections were coming from me. It was my plays, which makes sense. So how you should look at this is the closer something is to the center, the tighter that vertical dyad is, the tighter that relationship, the more games I played with those people. So what I did, how I coded this, is the number of times I played a game with somebody, the number of what's called weight between the two. So for this one right here, the closest one, that was 43 plays, and that was with Justin, the one who went to Houston and picked up paint for me. And I'm so thankful for that. But that's because we played through all of Memoir 44, and we played through 32 games of it, which is incredible and had a great experience. And I'm so thankful to now have one of the expansions and get this back to the table when it's safe to do so. Justin, we're going to play. So the closer something is to the center, the closer to the relationship. So and the closer other dots are to each other, and where things are oriented also matters because they have a relationship with each other. So if you look at this, so if I highlight just the green one, it shows all the dots connected to me. Makes sense. If I click on one of these solo dots over here, kind of like that fourth dot on the last one, the fourth node, it only has a relationship with me. Full transparency, this dot is someone who doesn't live in town here with me, someone I don't really get to see, and they live in another city, who I get to play games with at conventions. So what this tells me, by the way, is that when I play with this person, they're not really connected to the rest of my network because I only get to have certain experiences with them a year. And so what you can do is you can look at your relationships based on where you get to play them, because you might recognize and acknowledge people that otherwise aren't part of your normal consideration set of who you get to play games with. And that's important because if you want to grow your network, you need to actually recognize what your network currently is. And so some other things that are fascinating here. So like these 5 blue dots. So the size of the dot is the number of connections it has total across the whole thing. The then color of the dot is also that same thing. It just helped for coding it. So that way I know that those 5 dots are essentially my core game group for those 100 plays. What's also fascinating is where they are, because these 4 are all individuals who are part of the meetup that I go to and I run here in town. This one over here is my wife. And what's fascinating, I can draw a line right here. And that is, if I am playing a game with my wife, yes, those 4 people might also be there because they're my closest gaming partners in all of this. But all of these dots down here on the bottom, the only time they come out is when I'm also playing with my wife, typically. These 2 dots right here are a husband and wife couple. Now I could have put the labels on this. That's how I know who these people are, but I didn't want to do that because this is a video out on YouTube. So understand that's why I'm not saying who these people are for the most part. This is a husband and wife couple, and I typically play games with them at their house. And so when I play with one, there's a good chance I might play with another. And this one other dot sometimes also comes. And then these dots down here are also different, like husband and wife, or just partners. And what's fascinating is then they also then connect back to my wife. And then all of these people, the further out something is away from me, is the weaker that relationship is. So I would consider the redder the dot and the further away it is, the more of a stranger, maybe acquaintance, maybe that person is to me. And so that is where I have the greatest capacity to enhance a relationship through intentional efforts. The ones who are closer are the ones who have played essentially a very valuable place in my life and my gaming experiences. And the question then arises, am I recognizing that, and am I thanking them and pouring into their needs and wants as well? And so it also provides that opportunity of, by reflecting on the gaming community that I have, I can see where I might want to say a little bit extra thanks to people who've played a role in my life and my games. And I just want to say right now, thank you for that. So by doing this, you're also able to recognize and be thankful and see the experiences that you have. And what's interesting about this too, by running this in this program, so what it looked like though, by the way, I remember 36 people. And so I had to map 36 by 36, and I had to use the combinatorics to figure out, okay, that was 630 different discrete relationships that existed. And so when I look, the average degree, which means the average number of connections, by the way, within this network, was 6.38. And so there's about, between the dots, about 6.38 other connections from dot to dot. The other things you can do, you can look at the graph density. The graph density essentially shows you how overlapping, like two Venn diagrams, two circles, how overlapping they are, whether it's perfect or whether it's more discrete. And so by having a 0.18, that means essentially 18%. So my networks within this, so those little pockets, only overlap 18% of the time. And so I have a lot of different networks going on here. And it's important to acknowledge that, because then I'm having to do multiple things. And that's fine. That's how I have been playing, because sometimes I play at a meetup. Sometimes I play with family in certain situations. But it also means I'm giving in a lot more areas than I might have been considering before. So I know I just kind of went down this whole thing, but I'm a very data and leadership and intentional mindset. And so I always want to help you. And I think by sharing what's going on for me, I'm able to maybe offer a glimpse into what you can do. So I'm going to get into that now. Like, what can you do to enhance your relationships and get more games out with more people and have a better time in this great hobby? So what can you do? The first is, and I just need to acknowledge this, and that is understanding why you want to do this. Be honest with yourself. Is it because you want to acknowledge who's in your life? That's beautiful. Is it because you're just wanting to get more of your games to the table and trying to find a way to do that? Is it because you are wanting, maybe you're in a position where, you know what, I can't really afford to get games, but I can afford to give people time, and those people might have access to more games. Or it might even be to acknowledge the level of relationships you have with people and just wanting stronger ones. When I'm recording this, we're in the midst of the global pandemic. And with that being said, I know connections with other people are difficult, and many of us need those relationships, and relationships are a good thing. And so maybe you're just wanting to see, where can you and who can you bring more into your circle? Who are you, because of everything going on, who haven't you seen? And just being intentional about that. And if that's the case, I commend you, and I want to celebrate you. And honestly, whatever your reasons are, I want you to put in the comments. I want to hear from you. What are you hoping to do with your game group? Like, what are you hoping to do with your relationships? The next thing I'd recommend doing, not necessarily jump to what I just created, this whole social network analysis thing. That could be where you're going, but start simpler than that. The first thing I would do is make a list. make a list of who have you played with. Not necessarily the games, you can do that in a second, but just a list of who on the top of your head have you gamed with. And this comes from actually a leadership and more of a entrepreneurial lens that they actually teach at the Disney academies, in which they have you and imagine as new Imagineers write down your first 100 like best ideas, and then they have you crumple that up and throw it away, and then write 100 more. And then they crumple that up and throw it away, and then write 100 more. And people tend to be like struggling at this point because they're like, "What do you mean? Like I thought all this is innovative." And in actuality, you need to just really dig in, and because whoever comes to the top of mind first might just be those blue dots, and you might not remember all the red dots. So first, just make a list of who have you played with. The next thing is you can maybe add on a new element, maybe a bucket approach of where have you played. So may it be a meetup, may it be on Board Game Arena, maybe games that are on Steam, may it be at your house, at a friend's house, at a convention, if you've been able to do that. The bucket approach might help. You can also, if you have games in your collection, maybe make a list of those games and who have you gotten to play them with. Then have your holistic list of what's your gaming group. The next thing that I just want to point out though is access. And so remember in the back of your head, if you're wanting to grow your gaming group, not everyone has access to the same things. I actually got a message just 2 days ago from a buddy who I see at conventions, just like that other dot, who's like, "Hey, I want to get to gaming with more people that we normally see at conventions. What's your gamer tags on like Xbox, PlayStation?" Well, I don't have an Xbox or a PlayStation. I have a Switch. I have a Mac that I would do all this recording on, because it's just not always been my cup of tea to do those things. I used to, but I started getting vertigo when I play some like first-person shooter games. And so I just don't have access to that. Or somebody might not have the financial means of access to a convention and things like that. And so recognizing that in growing your network, it's being intentional about what other people can have access to. So I just want to put that out there before we get to the goals, because it's going to be important that you also recognize the other people involved and what their financial or time or other situations might be. You can then identify game types. So I talked about co-op games or versus Euro games, maybe games that you play 2-player with that one relationship where I was playing Memoir 44. It's a 2-player game. We also love playing Star Wars Rebellion, which is a 2-player game. And that dynamic might change who is in which things. And you can make this little list next to those people. So that way you can think of, oh, if this person I know loves playing 2-player games, what are some 2-player games I can play? And then the last thing you can do too is acknowledging and reflecting on what stage of relationship are you with them. Are you in that stranger phase? Are you an acquaintance? Or have you gotten all the way to that partnership phase? And recognizing then each of those levels is going to require a slightly bit different intentionality to enhance it or to sustain it. So what do you do once you have the list? Once you have the list, I want you to make goals. You can make a lot of different goals. One of the basic frameworks I'd recommend always when I'm teaching leadership things is SMART goals. If you haven't seen this before, it stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. That might be as simple as I want to play with these 3 people a game on Board Game Arena because I have a premium account and they can just go on the website and go and access whatever game we're playing. And I want to do that in the next 2 months. That is very specific. That is measurable. Did I play a game with those people? Is it attainable? 3 people, 2 months? Yeah, it is. Is it timely? Yeah, I put a deadline on it in the end there. And is it realistic? It is. What you can also do is we're approaching the New Year's at the time of this recording, so you can do what's called a 10 by. The most basic one of which is 10 by 1, which is identifying that you want to play these 10 games or have these 10 experiences one time each. And so you get a group together to commit to this, to say, we're going to play these 10 games one time each. Josh, who I record the podcast with, has been talking all year about how he was doing a 10 by 5, so 10 games 5 times each, and how they even left in what's called wildcard opportunities. So they didn't fully flesh out their 10 game list. There were some opportunities for new games that could come on. So that way, if a new game comes out, they can put that out there, or if it's a new game gets in someone's collection and they're really wanting to bring it in, then you're able to do that. Or the most ambitious of this is the 10 by 10, which is 10 games, 10 times. So that's 100 different gameplays. Now, what I want to acknowledge though, going back to in groups versus out groups, by doing these, especially more of the 10 by 5 and 10 by 10, you're creating a definitive in group. And it's just important to acknowledge that. That's not a bad thing. It's just saying that it's you and these 3 other people who are committing to playing these 50 or even 100 games together over this coming year or whatever. And just acknowledge that you are making a very positive and intentional step in that relationship that's going to take away time from some of the other people. And just know that's going to be what's going on. And so whatever you checks and balances want to build into that might be important. But I commend you in having that positive growth of a relationship and attempting to do this. And if you are committing yourself to any of these goals, or you're setting another SMART goal for yourself, please drop it in the comments, because I want to be able to celebrate you and ask you how it's going. The next thing I'd highly recommend is tracking it. That really goes back to that measurable. and there's another aspect we can pull in, that just having results. And there's that fulfillment of committing yourself to a goal and then seeing how you've been able to reach it, or make progress towards it, or even surpass it. So for me, like I said, I use BG Stats. Now, full transparency, I kind of failed at that this past year with everything going on. I didn't even think to apply BG Stats to tracking my gameplays on Board Game Arena or Tabletopia or these different platforms. Yeah, I'm changing that for the upcoming year to help also inspire this video. What's cool about that is you can, if you're tracking who you play games with, it'll show you how many games you're playing with different people. Now, it doesn't show you like I showed you. I had to do a couple more steps, but it's a very cool interface and I'd highly recommend it. This is not sponsored by Board Game Arena or BG Stats, but it's really cool tools to get more games in and to recognize the relationships and where you're playing with other people. Couple of last things, reevaluate periodically. It's important that we don't just set and forget. It's important that we pause, reflect, and see where we're at. So I know Josh talked about on the podcast on how in his last group, they got to about 40 gameplays of the 10 by 5. And then one person had to step away. They were moving. They had some stuff come up, and that's okay. You still played 40 games with these other people. So reevaluate periodically, and because you might want to change that goal. Don't just go so big. Make things just more meaningful chunks, and recognize that in the humanness of all of this, those goals can change, because we've all got stuff that happens. If anything, we've seen a lot of that this year. And then finally, just seek to acknowledge the humanness of the situation. You're doing this with other people. We're all going to have different commitments that come up in life. We've got different things going on, and acknowledge that you're playing games with people. And that by recognizing that, we move beyond the commodification of other people to get more games to the table. And I just want to put this out there. If you get to move beyond that and you see the humanness, that means that hopefully they're going to also see the humanness in you, and you're just going to hopefully have a more fulfilling experience. That's really, really some of the most beautiful things about this hobby. I love the fact that gaming provides an opportunity for people of many different backgrounds to sit at a table and foster genuine experiences with one another, and that you're going to remember for a very long time. And the closer those relationships are, the more fun, the more relaxed, and the better experiences you're going to have out of all of these things. So in the end, it's all about being intentional in our relationships. And have I always been the best at this? No. But the thing that's important to me and should be important to you is that we all try. And we try to make the best of the relationships we have. We try to enhance the ones that are right there that we can grab, low-hanging fruit, and to make them better, because we're going to have more experiences. We're going to be able to have more games get to the table. And so with that, I hope to game with you at some point, and I hope to keep engaging with you. So I hope that you drop some stuff in the comments, so that way we can talk about the relationships and experiences we've gotten to have in this amazing hobby. And I encourage you to subscribe to us over on all the podcast platforms. And if you want to hear more like behind the scenes things or talk with me, I also encourage you to go on over to our Patreon, patreon.com/boardgameimpact. But we end every episode of the show, and I end every episode of this with the following, and that is, at the end of the day, go make your positive impact on the world. I'll talk to you later.